at Constitutional Hill, the Human Rights Festival, to have a discussion under the theme, Reclaiming Our Shared Humanity, Protecting Human Rights by Combating Racism and Xenophobia. So when we look at this theme, there's really two things that come to mind. The first one is that our shared humanity has been lost, hence the need to reclaim it. And the second is that the threats to this humanity are xenophobia and racism. So these are two conceptually distinct ideas, but they speak the same language. And that's the language of intolerance, the language of exclusion, and also the language of hegemony, of hierarchy. So our mission here today is really to discuss how to deconstruct this language through the tools of community building, dialogue, and also the visual arts. So to help us navigate this discussion, we have four eminent speakers. The first, to my left, is Damien Samuels, who leads Fade to Black, a film studio focusing on human interest stories. We also have Coach Merlin. Coach Merlin is a basketball player turned community activist, and he's played with teams in Angola, the DRC, and now South Africa. We also have Gahlia Brogneri, who's the executive director of the Adonis Musati Project. She works with refugees and asylum seekers. We've also got Felicity Harrison with the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation. So I mentioned the use of visual arts to discuss this story, and there's two films that I'd like to play. The first one is Coach Merlin, produced by Fade to Black, and the second one is a trailer for the documentary Berser, focusing on racism in the Western Cape. So let's start with the first one on Coach Merlin. Could we turn the lights off? Thank you.
I born in Congo, in the family of 12 children. How basketball came, I was always following my cousin sister to the training all the time, carrying his bag, and they get in the practice, playing with the ball, shooting it in the hoop. So that is what I was doing all the time. When I play basketball, people are loving to see me playing basketball. So especially when I shoot the ball, people were shooting the ball one hand, but I was shooting the ball two hands. So people was like, oh, he's shooting two hands and he's scoring all the baskets. So what's going on? Now they was asking, how are you doing that? So I can't explain because I just doing it. So I come here just for play basketball, and then I have to bounce to go somewhere else because there was no basketball in South Africa. There was just stats. But the people, those was ruling the professional league on that time, they said that the money disappear. We can't play basketball anymore. And then it cost us 20 years here in South Africa. No professional league. To put food on the table, I have my own business in Philip. I am in Boston, and they are like making beautiful furniture around the Philip. I'm passionate about the basketball, but I cannot make a living out of it. I got son, so he can go further with it. It was Michael inspired me to become a coach.
So my father, Merlin Mosoko, he put the ball in my hands at a young age. I was like 5 years old, and it was like a torch being passed down to the next generation. And I used that as motivation to continue working hard and become the best player I can ever be.
When they see Mike playing basketball, scoring, layups, shooting, now the kids also say, they're excited. Me also, I can do that. Now I start teaching them how to do it.
So kulapho yaqala khona baza abantwana bethu ukuza kwabo batshintsha ulife wabo baye kuba sesitratweni sithanda bayabaqokelela abenza into ezirongo esitratweni behleli nje nababhizi babuya esikolweni baleqa ejimini litshona ilanga bangena ezindlini so kubekho complain ba uanam wasewathi uanam wasewabo nje into ezirongo senze baye abaqokelela kakhulu ibasketball time.
I didn't think one day my club can become big as it is now. Picking up some trophies, championships, seeing people talking about my achievements and all those is happening today. So I'm so proud of it.
I would like to thank my dad, Merlin Mosoko, for being a father and being present in my life since I was young. And I feel like I was blessed with his talent and his basketball skills, knowledge, and I have him by my side on and off the court as motivation and as a piece of advice that I can carry with me every day.
The impact coach Merlin, my father, had in life is a big one. He played a father figure, and I'm grateful, very grateful, and I hope like one day I'll do the same to my kids, give them that like culture and stories he basically tells us at night.
I'm proud of basketball, and I'm proud of my daddy and my brothers who works a lot on basketball, and Michael won a trophy, and I love them.
Imagine from 8 years to 8 years, I'm still playing basketball, I'm still coaching basketball, I'm still in the court of basketball. That's amazing.
So our next film, Bersig, focuses on a different community in the Western Cape, but many of the same themes. Could we play this one as well?
Wat mense bly nie in die dorp en ons kleerlinge mense bly binne in Bersig.
Dis maar weinig waar wat mens in Bersig sien.
My parents have lived in town, they did live in town, but got put into the Bersig area.
Ons was die gesin, die Bersig is vir ons afgebaken en die dorp is vir die wat mense afgebaken.
Daar is baie min geleenthede in Bersig as wat in die dorp is.
As ek as 'n kleerling jong man in die dorp loop, jy het nou daai dat mense jou aankyk as jy nog by wit mense so verby hulle huise en so aan. Hulle sal jou nie verwelkom soos jy binne Bersig verwelkom word.
Ek voel ek word dopgehou as ek in die dorp rondloop.
You do feel the entitlement coming from the white people who live in town, but it's never really like blatant to your face. It's always like a feel.
Waar as nog daai kleer verskil waar mense stereotypeer en dink dat jy kom miskien steel of inbreek of whatsoever.
Hulle bel sommer vir die polisie so van kom loop jy aan ons kom eens weer rond.
Something to look forward to. So, Damien, you work in film, and I think for a lot of us who work in government and other sectors, almost as a reflex, there's this temptation to look at these issues almost exclusively through a policy lens. What happens then is you lose the individual. How can we merge the really dry, technical policy aspects of this issue of migration with the human story?
Thank you so much. All right, so I'm the owner of Fate Black Productions, but I'm also a lecturer at the Cape Peninsula University of Technology in the media department. So policies is necessary, right? It's absolutely necessary, and we have to have policies that guide change and law, and it's essential. But how we bring these desired goals for human rights across to people, policy is dry, it's written in prose, it's not accessible to the majority of the people, right? So for me, there needs to be a bridge between perhaps policy and understanding what human rights are. And for me, the visual media serves as that bridge, right? It is something that is consumed in mass, and it's also something that travels very fast. I mean, if you put a video online, media is the fifth estate, right? There used to be the fourth estate, and the fourth estate was journalism. How do you hold power accountable? But we've moved on since then, and now we have the fifth estate. That essentially, and it comes with, the fourth industrial revolution, where we don't no longer need permission to do things. Policy happens at a very high level, and what sometimes happens is that it stalls and it's delayed. If you want things to change fast, you need to communicate these messages through mediums that the majority of the people can access. And for me, we are blessed, in fact, at this point in history, to have online and have the ability to create messages and craft messages for the masses of people that can easily be distributed. So for me, I really see media as a bridge, right, to reach people, and also to take very complicated, dry prose and to break it down into accessible bits of information for people to understand. The other thing is we are human beings, right? We speak about human rights. Human beings don't always think rationally, and they don't always think in how do I say this now? We don't always think like policy people will think in a very technical way, right? So media for me is an effective medium. It's a medium of feeling, especially visual arts. It's not a medium, it is a medium of thinking, but it's an effective medium. So you get people to feel what the person who is being represented feels. And for me, that type of power that media has to take someone that you would otherwise not know, because I think the core the problem with human rights is the lack of integration in our society, which is perhaps another topic. But media can bridge that fact that we live in different class communities that are still structured along racial lines. In South Africa, you can mitigate where you live through education, for instance, but masses of people still really live in the communities which they were thrown into, so to speak. But they all have access to a phone, and they all have access to media. So we can take the messages to them wherever they are. And that, for me, is the power of media, and I think audiovisual medium, especially filmmaking, has that potential and perhaps even responsibility. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
No, definitely. And I think you and Coach Merlin should be really proud of what you've put together. I think it's a really moving story, and it's the kind of thing we need to change the narrative. Now, what you mentioned, Damien, was the issue of integration. And this is really a success story for integration, Coach Merlin. I think you've really done a fantastic job. Yes, no, feel free to pass the mic. You've come to South Africa and you've rebuilt a life, but at the same time, you've sort of built a community around you, and it's to everyone's benefit. You've been able to convince the children that basketball is worth their time, and that the parents that they can change their attitudes towards migrants. What's it been building these two separate things that are still related, your life and then the community you've built in the Western Cape in Philippines?
Thank you very much. First of all, it was how I was feeling and how I was thinking about building my family in the area that I was living, and I did see that having my kids in the same area is going to not be easy for growing up my kids. So I was thinking already that so if I have a boy as my child, so I have to make sure that to keep him busy with the skill of basketball, so with playing basketball. So God bless me also, and then I have a boy. That was my firstborn, so I say, okay, it's fine. Just let me wait for him until he grown up, and let's see what we can do. So Mike was 5 years on the time, so I said, okay, let me go and look for a small basketball. Then I found a big basketball. I just end up to him and say, so Mike, you have to play basketball. And he start now playing basketball on the roads, and the kids coming around him, and then he was like keeping the ball now. He don't want others to touch. I said, no, play with them. So they start just playing. So it was a kind of showing to the child that you need to know how to share, and also you need to be with people. So yeah, it's where now the idea of starting teaching them basketball coming from there. So as a grown up in Congo, so is how our society in Congo was living. So we were so friendly, and also we didn't care about who are you and where you come from. So isn't that way? So it's where I did start teaching the kids about the skills for basketball, and the idea came out to create a basketball team from small ages. As myself did start playing basketball when I was very small, 8 age. So I said, now Mikey can start from 5, so he can grow up with the skill of basketball. So it's where I start teaching the kids in the area, and trying to give them life skills by giving them opportunity to play sport of basketball. So until I see a lot of kids start coming, and some of them coming and go, and the big guys also start coming also. Then the ideas come now, no, let me create a basketball team to make sure that those kids can go and meet other people in other communities. So it's where we did take it up. So that was the idea, to have a basketball team and try to bring the kids and to take the kids away from what was happening in the area, because the area was so very bad for the kids. The kids was in the small ages. You can see the kids start smoking during the festival of Christmas, or when there's a end of the year, they're drinking. You see a kid of 13, 14 years drinking alcohol. So it was not good to see. So it's where now I say, no, let me take a group of kids that try to take them away from the community sometime, to go visit other communities so they can start now seeing new people and try to change their mentality also. So it's where that idea was coming from. So basically is what I can say.
No, and I mean, the impact of the work really speaks for itself. I have a couple of questions that I'd like to point to you about the experience of integration and also language as well. So I take it you're a French speaker, and what's really stood out to me in this film is that all of your children speak with a very distinct colored accent. But before I get to that, I wanted to ask you, Gahlia, in some of the work that you do with refugees. So Coach Merlin's story is a success story, but a great many stories about migrants in South Africa don't look like that. What are some of the challenges you've seen?
I mean, there's a lot of challenges, and of course, integration is really difficult. But something that a refugee woman said to me many years ago is that our solutions come from ourselves. And so at AMP, I think what we try to do is find champions like Merlin in different areas and with different skills, and come alongside them and support them, so that the solutions come from people with lived experiences, both South Africans and foreign nationals. Because I agree with Merlin that you can change as many policies as you want, and you can have as many workshops and talks, but if you don't change people's minds and hearts on the ground in real impactful ways, in relationship and in community, it's not going to change. And so the basketball, we've been working with Merlin for many years, and just watched as his club has grown and had more and more children have joined, and it really is the most incredible impact. We did an evaluation on how it improved their self-confidence and their mental health, and we know that sports actually, it increases empathy. Research has shown that. So it's one powerful way of reaching people and building friendships across divides. There are other ways that we address those challenges, and we've done it with other programs. In education, for example, we've realized, especially since COVID, that there were a lot of kids struggling, to catch up with schoolwork. And so we support kids by paying stipends to refugee and South African students to tutor high school kids. We've had remarkable results over the last 3 years, but it's showing young people that other refugee young people can help them, and help them through their education and through their schoolwork. So I won't mention all the other projects that we're doing, but it really is about just walking alongside other champions and other people with good ideas in their communities that have the experience, and seeing how we can help them and support them to make the difference themselves. They have really good ideas. I don't know if that answers your... Yeah, but it is challenging, and especially for young people.
Can I ask, what have been some of the challenges you've experienced?
So I think it's a sense of belonging. If I just focus on young people, it's a developmental thing as well, and having an identity crisis at certain stages of your life, especially when you're an adolescent, and coming from another country, and coming here. And you talked about the language just now. So who do you belong to? Are you Congolese? Are you South African? Are you Zimbabwean? Are you, South African? And it's creating a sense of belonging, and that's what young people struggle with anyway. But if you have to bring other factors in, like not having documentation, or being bullied at school because your language is different, or you didn't grow up here, or you speak differently, or you eat different food, those kinds of things, and I'm putting it mildly, but people really do get bullied quite badly, young people, for being different. And it's one of the most important things for a young person, is to belong and to fit in. And so it's creating those safe spaces where, and that's what they actually asked us to do, the young people in focus groups that we've had over the years, creating those safe spaces where people can learn together, play together, and work together, but on a very grassroots level. Otherwise, you create all kinds of other problems for already troubled young people in this country.
So, Felicity, a lot of the debate around migration in South Africa is about attitudes. And what we generally hear, especially for myself as a young person, is that the problem is generally with the older generation. That, these people are backwards, and once they're out of power, or once it's our time, things are really going to change. But one of the things we see in the documentary is a lot of the average xenophobic tropes are held by people younger than even myself, people in high school. And what do you think the solution is to that, to get young people to change their perspectives as well?
Gosh, thank you. I think it's already been mentioned. It's about creating spaces where people can come together. That is the most important element of breaking down the stereotypes. So if you look at the research that we've done at IJR, you'll find that the majority of spaces where people interact with people just from different races, let alone from different African countries, they're very few. The most, the space where we get the most interaction between people of different races is in commercial spaces. The least popular space for interaction is in our homes. Now, if you look at the quality of the relationship of people in commercial spaces, we're just walking past each other. We're not really interacting. There's no authentic human, we're not humaning with each other in those spaces. And the space that we human most is in our homes. And so we've got this inverse problem where we don't see people in our homes, where and when people are in our homes, they're with us as an equal, as a peer. Whereas in commercial spaces, there are also hierarchies, and where general attitudes of and stereotypes prevail. So I would say that for us, there definitely, we live in a highly segregated community. So if you just look at in Cape Town, where I come from, there are many people who live in communities and townships who have never been to the waterfront. They live 5, 10, 20 kilometers away. And a number of years ago, I was working with an organization where we were taking children to the waterfront. They were so scared to get on the bus because they thought they were being kidnapped. The sense of getting out of their own community and going and seeing something else was so frightening to them. We had to get the parents to come in and calm them and assure them that they would be returned and that everything was okay. And it's scary that young children feel that they're being kidnapped just because they're going outside of their communities. So I think that for me is probably one of the biggest problems. And we see that again with the integration issue. Our studies have shown that about 1/3 of South Africans will either actively prevent people from having businesses, homes, or accessing healthcare and other government services in their communities. 1/3 of South Africans would actively do that. And that's scary. I mean, there's hope for us that 2 out of 3 people won't do that. But the fact that we have got such a fear of the other and we don't know the other, I think is very problematic.
Again, on this point of integration, that's, as I see it, in many ways a problem directed at migration, but there is also a different kind of integration in South Africa between the races that were here. So in that integration as a racial concept versus a purely migration issue, how do you see that working as well? Because, I mean, there hasn't been too much success.
Yeah, well, a part of the work that we do is to actually try to bring people together. One of the things that we've also recognized in South Africa is that there is conflict and tension within race groups as well, that we just do not speak of, and the problems there abound. So we follow a two-track strategy, which I know is controversial because in some ways we need to deal with the argument, and I think it's a good one, that we're reinforcing racial categories by talking about we will have inter-race dialogues and intra-race dialogues. And we have to be very careful not to reinforce the very categories that we're trying to break down. But I think, again, you know, the integration is very difficult because not only have we still got spatial apartheid, but the economy and the class issues make it incredibly difficult. And so the other, whether if you're a farm worker in the Western Cape, and the other is somebody from the Eastern Cape, it's somebody from the DRC. We have layer upon layer of complexity within integration, which we find works best. The best way to break that down is to bring people into spaces where they can listen to the experience of the other and listen to understand and not to defend themselves. And then to be able to find those points of, oh, hang on a sec, that's exactly what is going on in my community. And to find those points of connection and go, actually, they're not so different. They're not so scary. But those spaces are few and far between, which is why the work that Coach is doing is so important.
So on this issue, Coach, of identity, and it's been some time since you've been away from home, the experience of your children, who seem to me very well integrated. I mean, like, if I met them on the street, I think that they were colored kids. That's essentially the way I would look at it. How have you, one, tried to keep their background alive, their heritage as being Congolese, but also merging that with their experiences in South Africa and realizing that those are also valid?
Yeah, first of all, I just encouraging them to grow up with a lot of love. And everything they have to do, and if they have they are successful on it, they have to come back where they did grown up and give back to the rest of the community. So it's what I always telling them, that they need to have more love to the environment, the people those living with them. So they can always get a way of integrating themselves in the community, as I did. So sport, it was my way to get in the community, to he said that to integrate myself in the community. So it's the same thing that I used to telling them. If they are successful in their life, they need to come back in the same community and give back what they deserve.
And I also want to ask about this issue then of language. Afrikaans is my home language. My parents were very adamant that I was going to grow up being able to speak Afrikaans, and being the complexion that I am, that's also deeply political as well. But it was important to them because their language represented their identity, it tells a story. And in your context, speaking French and no longer having a francophone community around you, how's that been? and then also trying to like keep some element of that alive for your children as well?
It was not easy to integrate myself in the community out of speaking the language that the community is speaking. But as I said, I use the language of a sport to be integrated in the community. So yeah, that was the way. And I was seeing that it's giving impact to the community. As I was working with the kids and the parents, they were so excited to see how I was always with their kids. They start to trust me to be with their kids. And I just took it from there, and I continue with what I was doing. So until it's grown up and everybody can see the future of their kids that is promising one day they cannot join drugs and some gangsterism groups and all of things. So that was the impact of what I was doing in the community. That's correct.
So then, speaking about community, we have the community in the room. Perhaps we can get some questions from the audience. If not, I see a few people I'd like to direct a question to myself. So, any takers? Not all at the same time, please. I mean, comments as well. Just your general perception. Really, we were really interested in your views. Please, okay, all right.
Thanks. So I wanted to touch on a point, sorry, the gentleman with the hat, I missed your name earlier, that you were talking about the media and how it gives us the opportunity to interact, or I guess get a slice of life from people that we ordinarily wouldn't interact with. And I guess my question is something that I've struggled with a lot when we have these kinds of forums, that to a large extent today we are preaching to the choir. I think we're all here because we all assume and know that racism and xenophobia is a problem. So I guess my question comes down to, how do we communicate these ideas of integration, of using media, to people who need it the most, to people who aren't interested, who aren't coming to these events, because those are the people that we need to convince and change their minds. And just something that I've struggled with, because, you know, like I've said before, I think we're preaching to the choir here today. How do we extend this message to the people who aren't coming to these events?
I remember you from the coffee shop. Yes, yes. Right, so through the process of creating, let's call it a video, if you are not transformed through the process yourself, then you've done something wrong. So I guess if we are going to invite people to come here, it will be people who really understand things, right? So you are quite right. I think that the media is a means to get people. Sometimes you got to also trick them and insidiously kind of place these messaging and things, you know. But I really think that doing it this way, like telling these beautifully crafted stories, and I just want to take a step back and say, I'm just the conduit. It's his story, you know. It's Merlin's story. For me, what I had to do is step back, and I had meetings with Gahlia, and we connected as people, not as a client and as a service provider. We connected, and we had numerous chats and brainstorming, and the one thing we kept saying, where's the human story? Where's the human story? What's the human story? And we toyed with so many different ideas. And when we settled on Merlin, because we had lots of other ideas, and I mean with Alice as well, busy with something right now. There are beautiful stories out there, amazing stories. And the first step is to get those stories told. Because what happens then is that you are challenging the stereotypes, right? Because the stereotype is usually based from a position of anxiety, fear, and people don't really know the other, so they keep their distance from them. And what happens then, if you're not communicating and you don't have a friendship or neighborliness with people who are different to you, you don't have any other choice but to rely on stereotypes to guide your ideas of other people. So you have to take a risk. And I've got a few examples from my own personal life as well. But the risk I took with Merlin is to firstly say, I'm going to go into the community. Oh, by the way, I don't come from a privileged community. I come from one of those communities. So I understand the transition from the class mobility and all the things that's necessary for you to move. And I feel it's my responsibility to also help challenge these negative and stereotypical stories about the other. And it doesn't only have to be refugees or people from elsewhere. Even within South Africa, right, we have huge challenges about the other, and we rely on stereotypes. So my goal with Gahlia was to challenge these stereotypes and completely debunk them, because that is not the complete story of people and their lives. So what I try to do, yes, there's the media, which is the medium, but how you craft the story and the narratives of hope that you need to inculcate and spread is what is essentially important. So when I met Merlin, I thought to myself, oh my word, these children sound like me. And we had a wonderful laugh about it, you know. And I asked Merlin, are you going to do your interview in French? He's like, no, not doing it in French. I'm not going to tell you the reasons why, but Merlin chose to do his video in English. And I guess what I'm trying to say, through the process of making the video, we formed a friendship. Right? And when you sit in edit and you're checking things out, you're really looking, how do I put this? Yeah, I was thinking, how do I portray Merlin the way I see him? And that's how the story emerged. And I think we need to invest time and energy in getting to know those who are different to us before we formulate ideas about them. So it's a bit counterlogical, but that is the only way that makes sense. You can't really have ideas about people if you don't know who they are. That's dangerous. So yeah, I hope I answered your question in a long-winded way.
Does anyone of the panelists want to take that up as well, or? Oh, please.
It's always very dangerous to give me a microphone. So, yeah, I think that that speaks to so much of the work that we do as well. It's the not knowing and the then filling in that story with your own assumptions and with the stereotypes without actually getting to know. I think it's also very important, you know, just picking up on something that Damien was saying earlier around policy. We have to make policy in South Africa or anywhere based on the lived experience of people. And the only way that you can have an idea of what that lived experience is through media. That's the only way we're going to be able to find each other. And one of the things that really annoys me in the work that I do, people say, oh, you help give voiceless people a voice. No, people have got a voice. They need a microphone. And it's not about getting voices into the corridors of power. It's for the people who are supposed to be public servants to listen to the voices of the people that put them there in the first place.
Say something that there were quite a few people that saw that video, and I don't think that was the full video, that was just part of it that you showed. But some of them were school teachers in some of the townships where, school principals, where Merlin works, and he's been asked now to train school teachers in different schools in basketball. They've never had basketball before. And so our next project, which we're about to start, is actually training teachers and training young basketball coaches, and Merlin's going to be doing that. And so I think there's 8 schools that we've got, in different townships that we could do more. And there's a waiting list of teachers that want to be taught. So I don't know if that, in some way, that it's a ripple effect, but it's now changing. It's reaching schools. It's changing. It could change communities, and I really think it will. And that's just from one video that's been passed on, and it was passed to one principal and another principal, and I think it's amazing.
Any other questions from the audience? Okay, to my brother in the hat first, and then Adrian.
Sorry, I forgot your name. My question, you mentioned earlier about creating spaces where people can have these dialogues, and like my brother over there mentioned, we here, but the people that need to have the dialogue aren't here. And how do you go about creating those spaces where people don't have to feel defensive, don't have to feel like either they're being racist by asking the question or feel that they're being attacked? How do you go about creating those spaces for people to feel safe enough to ask possibly awkward or maybe racist sounding or xenophobic sounding questions?
ADHD.
Thank you. That's a great question. I think one of the things that we always start with is, before we have these conversations, is to create spaces of trust. Because often our stories about ourselves and our experiences make us vulnerable. And we already don't trust each other. In South Africa, we have massive trust deficits, whether it's between ourselves and our neighbors, or government, or people from different races, different sexualities, genders. We just don't trust anyone. So the first thing is to try and build up spaces of trust. And it is difficult. Some of the work that we do has involved going to people's workplaces and trying to have the conversations in the workplace. But that's incredibly difficult because you've also got hierarchies. And people then don't necessarily want to share something because their manager might be in the room, and all of those kinds of things. I think it's having a curious mind about another, and starting slowly. If you came to me and said, listen, I really don't get why white people, act in a certain way, I would be open to having that conversation with you. But of course, again, as you mentioned, we are in a space where we're talking to the converted. If you just randomly went up to somebody, they might just not react in the same way. But I think for me, one of the biggest things is look at the spaces where we are outside of work, in our sports clubs, in our churches. South Africa is a country where over the majority of people profess to be people of some religion or another. So we need to be using those spaces, and certainly in a religious space, we are supposed to be interacting as equals. So it's about identifying those spaces where we can have those conversations, but recognizing that this is also a long-term project. You can't just sort of jump into a conversation. I made the mistake. I traveled to a country and that I'm passionate and really interested about their politics. And the first question I asked a random person on the plane was, so how are you now that the troubles are over? And there was the sort of, the air was sucked out of the aircraft, and sort of I just sensed some reticence, and I realized I needed to start with, hello, my name's Felicity, this is where I work, And so I learned the hard way that you can't just go and ask these questions. It is about building trust. It is about building these safe spaces where we can work. And that can be as simple as at work, if you've got a canteen, sitting down and just having a conversation about your children or the weather or whatever, but recognizing that this work does take a long time and it requires us to do the work ourselves. Sorry, I can go on, but I'll stop there.
Thanks, Thomas. Very fascinating discussion, and I like the question because we get asked that all the time. You're talking to the converted. We all know what we're talking about. How do we get the people on the ground? And I think we're missing a fundamental issue. We all know people. We have a household. Even in my own household, there are very hectic discussions about race in South Africa and the inequalities from the past and the other. So we've got a responsibility there, and I don't think we should lose sight of that. We can, in our own household, change people's opinions. It's difficult. It's never easy, even with siblings and parents. But that could have a catalyst, right? Because they know people in their neighborhood, and those people know people. It's small little steps like that, I think, that could help as well. And of course, I mean, the art of storytelling through media is fantastic. But it's something that needs to be done more, and I think more varied stories, because in South Africa we tend to have certain narratives all the time, and you hear that all the time, and it doesn't necessarily speak to the diverse nature of the country. And I think there's lots of stories that has to be told. And the story is fantastic, by the way. It's a great story. And being from the Cape, I also like the accent, for sure. One last thing maybe just to say around, I was reading a quote about, it was saying, if you're accustomed to privilege, equality feels like oppression. That's a brilliant quote. And I think it's so apt in South Africa, where you're trying to have those discussions, right? And you don't want to offend, but you need that space to also talk. So it's not really a question, but I'm sure you can reflect on that, and that's in the type of work that you are doing. So I think the message is really in our households, we can try a bit harder as well to try and change the narrative.
Yeah, so just a short response to what was your name again? Adrian. I'll just be frank about the type of challenges that we're dealing with. Like, I had a lady taking care of my kid from Malawi, and a close relative of mine said blatantly, "Why would you allow these people into your house?" Right? So you're quite right. In a micro way, every single conversation is the work that we are doing. Right? And earlier on I mentioned that there's a risk that you need to take, right? Because I think sometimes you are fearful of making a mistake, right? And so you rely on safety, but safety usually means exclusion. Stick to what I know. Don't bring those others in, right? Because I don't know what I'm going to contend with. So you have to take a risk. Even with me, like I have a kid who was in a school, and I took him out because I disagreed with the principal's philosophy. She even went as far as saying, your kid is in a monocultural school. So I said, not over my dead body. So I took him out, actually that same day, and I moved him to another school. And he's in another school now, but it's a public school, but it's a good public school, right? So a lot of people will then ask me, why would you take him out of a Cambridge educated school and put him in a CAP school? You know that whole thingy. But you take a risk because I think what he's going to learn, other than the academics, is how to integrate with people who are different, because there are people from all different African countries at this school where I take him to. So now his friends they have like all different interesting names, and they're from Zimbabwe, they're from different places, Malawi, Congo, and those are his friends. If I kept him in the other school, right, and if I listened to what people who take what they think the safe route, which is usually informed by class biases more than anything else, right? Then you don't change anything. So we have to take a personal risk, and it is difficult. And for me, it's about neighborliness and friendship. You cannot really know someone else if you're not their friend. You have to take the time, you have to step back and have a conversation with them. And you know what? The things you end up talking about is the common universal human things, if you can really just look past the difference. I mean, we had a lovely conversation at breakfast, and it was about love. And Merlin said it earlier. And obviously, me being more like, kind of like devil's advocate, it's like, when you speak about love, people are going to think it's like how do I say, almost naive, right? And Merlin broke it down, and he said, yeah, I mean, there's risk, right? Maybe you want to talk about it. But we have to take a risk, and we have to step back and say, look, I have to step out of my comfort zone, and I need to get to know this person, see if there's a friendship, see if I can share neighborliness, see if I can find something in common. And it won't take more than 2 minutes to realize that you're talking to someone who has the same fears, anxieties, desires, aspirations in life that you have, and that's what makes us human.
Okay, how are we doing this? All right.
So I just have a comment. I'd like to take it back to Felicity's point where she said, you know, it starts with trust. So I think as humans, that should be the starting point for all of us. Yes, we have fears, we have anxieties, we have, you know, we are all working through past traumas that we've probably experienced, you know, but trust is the starting point for all of us. And from a personal perspective, I have friends that, you know, oh, this is my best friend, by the way, and she's introduced me to, we have a friend who left Zimbabwe to come and study in South Africa. And, you know, she had a lot of challenges in terms of, you know, furthering her education because, you know, the systems were created. The systems are not conducive for people that are not South African. And she needed our help to access education, which is a fundamental right, you know, according to our constitution. So I think trust is the starting point so that we're able to overcome the barriers, we're able to overcome the systematic exclusions that, you know, are preventing so many things from, like, so many people from accessing basic human rights. And once we overcome those fears, once we start trusting people outside of our comfort zone, we start showing others, so people within our households, people within our immediate communities, our immediate families, that this person is dangerous, this is someone that, you know, you can trust. And once the people around us start seeing that, you know, you can open your heart, your door to others that are outside of your immediate circle, it starts creating a ripple effect where we have everybody embracing other people regardless of race, regardless of, you know, where this person comes from, regardless of the language differences, because even as a South African, we have, like, you know, tribal issues amongst ourselves. Like, you'll hear somebody Sotho saying, I don't like Zulus, I don't like Xhosas, but if you ask them why, they will not be able to tell you because those divisions have been there for the longest of time. So once we start with trust, I think we'll all move forward. Yes, we are sitting here as the converted, but what is it that we are doing once we leave the space? Is this conversation going to just end here, or are we going to be like the messengers of change?
Yeah, that was a really great comment. Thanks for that. Thanks for everyone for being here and taking the time to speak with us. My question for you all was just about what do you think about the role of schools as it relates to social inclusion around race and migration? I know we talked a little bit about that so far, and you know, I see it as an opportunity just in terms of, you know, students having to go to those spaces, meeting others from different backgrounds, potentially mixing, socializing together, and then also having the opportunity to learn in the classroom. And so just wanted to get y'all's perspective around like what types of challenges and then opportunities you might see schools providing.
Any volunteers?
that okay? I mean, there's so many challenges, so many different levels. But I think, of course, you've mentioned, disappeared, just accessing, being able to write a matric and have the right documentation, all of those kinds of things, and then the language difficulties. So coming into a school, whether it's from somewhere else in South Africa or from another country, and not being able to speak the language that's being taught, that the teachers are using in the schools, for example, is really challenging. But I think there's a lot of opportunity, and there are a lot of people on the ground that are working in schools. So we partner with some schools and some organizations that do programs in schools. And it's also about finding those teachers, those champions in the school that you can connect with, that are willing to be a bridge for some of those kids and offer opportunities like those school principals that now want you to come into the school and do the coaching. And that's going to create a different kind of social cohesion and bring kids together. And they're going to see you, Merlin, in a different way. Here's a refugee coming to make a difference. And I think there are a lot of teachers, even Zimbabwean teachers that are in schools, that are already breaking down some of those stereotypes. But it is about finding those people that you can connect with in the schools, doing some advocacy, sharing the backgrounds of people and what they've gone through, so that people have more compassion and understanding for the people that they're teaching, and they can bring it into their curriculum, because it is part of the curriculum, looking at these issues that we're talking about today, but bring it in a meaningful way. And some of the things that we've been doing is taking some of our young people in our program, and they've gone into schools and they've shared their own story, their life story, in classrooms, in assembly. And that's been quite impactful and made quite a difference, because it's a human story and you can relate to that person. We've also made some digital stories that the young people that they've shared in schools, and South Africans and refugees, and they've listened to each other's stories, and it's been quite powerful, once again using media.
Sorry, I've grabbed the mic again. I just want to, if you don't mind, respond to some of the other comments before I answer your questions. I promise I will get there. I think one of the things that we need to do in South Africa is have the very difficult conversations about dismantling privilege. The whole thing about a privilege as being experienced as oppression is one that we see in South Africa, I think particularly, but also around the world. And we have to get over white fragility of, ooh, I didn't do it, I wasn't there, my parents didn't do this. We really need to have those difficult conversations and not allow white people to opt out of the race conversation. Part of privilege in South Africa is that white people don't have to speak about race. We can opt in and opt out at any moment. It is not a privilege that everybody else has, because it's a lived daily experience. I think we also need to have the difficult conversation around reparations, and that starts with the acknowledgement of harm, and it speaks to looking not just at apartheid, because that's very easy to just point to. We also have to look at slavery and colonialism and the roles that played in South Africa. White English-speaking South Africans, I think, have got away literally with murder. Nobody questions us, and I think that needs to be dealt with. In terms of the school question, we find a lot of children and a lot of teachers are dealing with trauma, whether that's intergenerational trauma, continuing trauma, and PTSD. And until we deal with the fact that children are coming to school traumatized, that they've been in domestic violence situations, they've seen shootings on the way to school. Teachers have seen shootings on the way to school. Teachers have to deal with your student was shot yesterday, so sorry, they're not going to be in the class today. We have to deal with trauma. We have to have those conversations as well. And until we've dealt with our own trauma, dealing with the national trauma is going to be very difficult. I spoke to a colleague who is from South America, and he felt that we should have a national Prozac program where you would have to, everybody would be given Prozac and you'd have to prove that you were okay to be taken off. Which I'm not sure, I'm sure the manufacturers of Prozac would be happy about, but I'm not sure everybody else would. But I think one of the difficulties that we've discovered, we work with a lot of schools who come to us because they've had racial incidents. And a large part of the problem is that we're dealing with cultures and institutions and systems that haven't actually progressed from apartheid. So teachers themselves do not know how to deal with the challenges that they are experiencing. And in many instances, we've got teachers who are, have grown up in one era and who don't know how to deal with a multicultural school now. They're dealing with a completely different student body from when they started. So we need to not only work with the students, but we need to also work with the teachers themselves in order to be able to have integration and to stop having, we have a multitude of racist problems that happen in our schools every day. They are not isolated incidents, they are the result of the structure and the culture that we have.
I'm just a bit sensitive of time, so there's one question I wanted to ask, and it relates to the point you raised earlier about preaching to the choir. Someone who's here today is Operation Dudula, so they have a presence at the conference, and this is it's very much a social issue, but it's also a political issue. And 2024 is going to be an election year for South Africa. So we saw the political debate become a lot more antagonistic with the recent local government elections. I'm curious, and anyone in the audience can answer this, or even on the panel, what kind of strategic interventions can we make tomorrow that will change the debate by the time elections come about? Because I think that's also important. Again, not all at the same time. Perfect.
Okay, Sanbolani. Yeah, so I'd like to sum it up regarding the Operation Tutula. So I think South Africa is we're the only place in the world that's experiencing something like Operation Tutula. Like coming from a young South African perspective, right? Because it's anti-human rights to be like other people don't belong in South Africa, whereas South Africa is a democratic country. It's one of the constitution is one of the best in the country, right? And when you go to like South Africans on the streets, in the townships, right? They are not aware of the global socio-political issues that cause people to come to South Africa. And that certain ignorance causes South Africans to feel like their own human rights are disregarded. Because as we all know, we're semi-dictatorship at this point right now. And the man on the street is so ignorant, according to my opinion, we're worse than back in apartheid, because we're no longer aware of global issues, right? So the the ruling party is still gonna win because we're in a semi-dictatorship. The Tata Zonke issue it's a boiling volcano, because at the end of the day there are many people of Middle Eastern origins in the township, and there's a lot of animosity brewing, right? So next day elections, it might be like this couple of few days, they might be shut down because of that issue of immigration and migration, people in the township not understanding the importance of being globally issues aware and stuff like that.
No, and I think that's a really good place to leave things on. Just really to emphasize that human rights are not a zero-sum game. To recognize the dignity of another individual costs you nothing. Your dignity is intact. And so long as that's the fundamental idea, we can ensure consensus on, both in the choir and outside of it. I think there's something to be optimistic about there. So again, thank you to all of our panelists and to the audience members as well. I've really enjoyed the engagement. What we're going to do in a bit is call a few of you out for some videos. We'd just like to get your general assessment of this. But a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you.
And our facilitator. Thank you, Thomas.
Clap again.